Hello, and thank you for tuning into Society Complex with your host, Vaughn Lee. And we are back for True Crime Chronicles here on this Monday. And if you've been following me on social media, you know that we have a new series starting today on this Monday. And if you have not followed me on social media, please do so. You can tweet me on Twitter at Society Complex 1. You can find me on Facebook at Society Complex, and you can also find me on Instagram at Society_Complex, or you are definitely welcome to shoot me an email at societycomplex10 at gmail.com. And like I said, if you follow me on social media, you know that we are starting a new series. Our last series was Infamous Female Serial Killers, and that was a lot of fun. So this one is about organized crime. So we're going to start pretty much at the beginning here of what actually is organized crime, defined by the FBI and so on and so forth. And then after that, then we're going to jump into some cases after we get a little bit of education first, okay? So organized crime is a category of transnational, national, or local groupings of highly centralized enterprise ran by criminals to do illegal activity. Now, most of them, as we know, are for profit, but there are some criminal organizations such as what we've known as terrorist groups that are more politically motivated than they are about money. So criminal organizations or gangs, they have many different words, but it's pretty much, the same. That's why it's called organized crime, obviously. But you may hear some referred to as the mafia, mob, ring, or a syndicate. And then they have networks and subcultures of community. It's like a community of criminals, and you may hear this referred to as the underworld. Okay, so according to some sociologists, to define a mafia is a type of organized crime group that specializes in the supply of extra legal protection. So they're kind of like the opposite of law enforcement, but the same as law enforcement, I guess. So it's like a law enforcement for criminals is basically what they're saying. So you may hear these terms, like I said, the mafia. So you may think as far back to pretty much the beginning with the Sicilian mafia, which totally predates lots of other groups and is generally an economic study when they have done about organized crime groups. So, like I said, you hear about the Sicilian mafia. Then you also hear about the Russian mafia, Chinese triads, Hong Kong mafia, and the Japanese yakuza. So those are just some of the ones that you probably know already that have been floating around for the past century, decade, further back than what we're dealing with now. Now, there's plenty of other organizations that run similar to what you would think as organized. So, like states, churches, militaries, police forces, and corporations. They may sometimes use the organized crime methods to conduct their activities. I know a lot of people probably think that's weird to say, but it is true. They run kind of just like that, which is where organized crime kind of is going. Running it like a business that you would see like as a corporation or something like that. Like people use that method to get, like I said, their activities done. Well, these might be legal activities, obviously, but it is also very, very similar. I thought that was an important point to point out because it is true. But they use their powers to more or less derive from their status that they were formerly at. So it's all about status and power. Basically, I think that's mostly in the legal world, and the underworld is, that's just what it is. But anyway, moving on along here in our organized crime. So sometimes we have the tendency to try to distinguish traditional organized crime, which is often gang-like or more working class in nature, which involves, secret subcultures like we were talking about before, but they can be formed from ethnic, regional, territorial, or cultural identities. And we want to try to distinguish those from some other forms of crime that usually may involve organized or group criminal acts. So when we say that, we're talking about the white collar crimes, financial crimes, political crimes, war crimes, state crimes, and maybe even treason. You can try to make those distinctions, like I said, between something that we would think of as traditionally called organized crime. But sometimes the distinction between those two is not always apparent, and it continues to be a matter of debate even to this day, because sometimes these other crimes, white collar crimes, especially financial crimes, people do work together in an organized way with some of those things. So some of it could be possibly considered organized crime, but like I said, that's a fight that is still going on today between agencies and sociologists and psychologists and whoever else investigates it. Even you out there that are listening to this right now, I'm pretty sure if you are a true crime buff like myself, you probably have debated this very same thing right here. And the debate is, like, for example, say in failed states, they can no longer perform basic functions such as education, security, or governance. It's usually due to some kind of violence or to extreme poverty. So organized crime, governance, and war sometimes complement each other. They go together. So the term oligarchy has been used to describe democratic countries whose political, social, and economic institutions come under the control of a few different type of families or business oligarchies, as they may be deemed, come from sometimes organized crime groups in practice. So I'm sure, like I said, if you are into true crime or you are into conspiracy theories, pretty sure you have heard about the families that, say, run the United States of America. So that's what that's talking about right there. And they're saying that has adopted into a organized crime group in practice. So you see what I'm saying? So therefore, you're trying to distinguish: are they can you consider them to be organized crime? Are they committing criminal acts? If they're, families and the oligarchies are running, for instance, like I said, countries and stuff like that. So is that organized crime or is that not? As defined by what we just talked about. So that is, like I said, that is the debate right there. That is the debate right there. So, moving right along here. So in the United States, the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970, it defines organized crime as the unlawful activities of a highly organized but also disciplined association. Right? So some criminal activities that are structured around that, you would refer to those as racketeering. So many of you, I'm pretty sure you know what that word means, racketeering, because then you're going to start talking about the RICO Act and things like that, which, and when I was doing research for this podcast, I really had to think about how I wanted to do it, and this is why I'm doing it this way first, so we know. Like when we move into the cases and we start using terms and dates and crime acts and laws and so on and so forth, I want you guys to understand what I'm talking about. And also, like if you're watching the news or if you're talking to your best friend or whatever the case may be, I want you to know exactly what you're talking about when you are speaking about really any subject, which is why we do a lot of teaching here on Society Complex, so we can learn to think for ourselves with the facts that are out there for us to use. So, back to this racketeering. And we're just talking about the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. So historically, the largest organized crime force in the United States has been the La Cosa Nostra Mafia. So that is an Italian-American mafia. But there have been other transitional criminal organizations that have also risen in the recent decades. So in 2012, the U.S. Department of Justice, in a journal, they stated, since the end of the Cold War, organized crime groups from Russia, China, Nigeria, Italy, and Japan have increased their international presence in worldwide networks or have become involved in more transnational crime activities. Most of the world's major international organized crime groups are present in the United States. So that's what they said about the rise, or the rising, I suppose, of criminal organizations or organized crime. And the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's 2017 National Drug Threat Assessment, they did classify Mexican transnational crime organizations, which this is, you'll hear this term or acronym later on, is TCOs. So those are transnational crime organizations. And then as they became the greatest criminal drug threat to the United States, they're citing their dominance over larger regions in Mexico, which they use for cultivation, production, importation, transportation of illicit drugs. So that is what they have deemed, that those are a bigger threat to the United States. They said this in 2017. So you're talking about Sinaloa, Los Zetos, things like that, drug trafficking cartels. And they're about, I think it's about 6 that they deem as the greatest influence in drug trafficking to the United States. So those are only a few. Like I said, the Sinaloa cartel, Los Zetos, Beltran Lava. I think it's one, what is it? Jalisco, New Generation, I believe it is, and Juarez and Gulf. Those are the 6 that they deem as the greatest influence of drug trafficking to the United States. So the United Nations Substantial Development Goal 16, it had a target to combat all forms of organized crime as part of the 2030 agenda. So that is the fight that they are fighting to this day, actually. So they're just really, really trying to crack down on the organized crime, especially so again, I just want to make sure we understand here. Organized crime, it can be transnational, national, local, stuff like that. So transnational obviously means that it is from one country to another, just so people are clear on that. National, that would mean in your own country, in one place, things like that. Okay? So we just want to make sure that everybody understands those things. So some of the next things that we're going to talk about here on this episode is we're going to talk about the models of organized crime. We're going to get into a little bit of criminal psychology as it has to relate to organized crime. We're going to talk about drug trafficking, cyber crimes, white collar crimes, and corruption. And those are things, like I said, those are also things that have a lot to do with organized crime, because when we get to talking about the RICO Act, which we will do on this episode, just so some of you guys may not know what RICO actually stands for, that is Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, okay? And then TOC, I already told you this, but I'll tell it to you one more time, Transnational Organized Crime, okay? And there's many levels of that. So in the government, as far as the FBI is concerned, they have the African TOC, Asian TOC, Middle Eastern TOC, things like that. So this is to combat transnational organized crime. So a lot of things that fall under the RICO Act, you have federal and you have state. So some of the federal ones, we go bribery, sports bribery, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, murder for hire, Like I said, drug trafficking, alien smuggling, and then when you go down to the state level of the RICO, you go murder, kidnapping, arson, gambling, bribery still in there, extortion, some drug activity. Okay, so those are some of the things, like I said, that we're going to talk about on this episode. But give me just a few minutes and we will be right back. So make sure you join us after the break so we can continue talking about organized crime. All right, and we are back. So thank you for continuing to listen right here on Society Complex for our True Crime Chronicles here on this Monday. So we're talking about organized crime. That is our new series, right? So the next thing we want to get right into, we want to talk about models of organized crime. So there's various models that have been proposed to describe some of the structure of criminal organizations. So organizational. Patron-client networks. Okay, this is the first one. So patron-client networks are defined by fluid interactions. So it's to produce small crime groups that operate at smaller units within a overall network. And they tend towards valuing significant others' familiarity of societal and economical environments or maybe traditions. So these networks, they usually consist of hierarchies that usually are based on naturally forming a type of family, social, and cultural traditions. So they're tight knit, they're focused on activity or labor. Right, so they're personalized activities. So this includes family rivalries, territorial disputes, training of family members, etc., etc. So that usually their belief system is on reliance of tradition. This including religion, family values, cultures, class of politics, gender roles, etc., etc. And communication and rule of enforcement mechanics, they depend on organizational structure. They still have social etiquette, and they have a history of criminal involvement and a collective of decision making. So that is patron to client networks. That's the first structure. So the next one is bureaucratic, or maybe you might also hear corporate operations. So this group of organized crimes, they are defined with general internal structures, and they focus more on how operations work, succeed, or sustain itself, and to avoid retribution. And they generally would be something go like a little bit like this: complex authority structure, extensive division of labor between classes within the organization. Then they have responsibilities to carry out in a impersonal manner, extensive written rules or regulations, as opposed to a cultural dictating action like we were talking about in the first one. And it's more of a from the top down kind of communication. So it comes from the top, then it goes down. So that's more like the mafia, stuff like that. So, and maybe actually also cartels you can throw in there. So, however, though, this model has a little operational flaws. Top-down communication strategy, it is susceptible to interception, which means that someone, may feel like they're too low at the totem pole here, and they want to come a little higher. So those interceptions the inception of the instructions that may have come from the top, they might not make it all the way down as they were told. So that is something that they leave themselves open and vulnerable to. So this is more like the thing where you see where, like I said, someone wants to overthrow someone from the top, and they want to come from the bottom, and they want to rise to the top a little bit quicker than they're supposed to. So that's when, like I said, they have opened themselves up to something like that. So, and then more further down the hierarchy being communication too. And then maintaining written records This also jeopardizes security of the organization, and it relies on increased security measures, which obviously can cost more money. Then you would have to trust more people. So that, like I said, this organizational operation of organized crime, it really has a lot of flaws, which I think some of them have, at least they thought, have kind of fixed these operational problems, but obviously not if a lot of you are sitting in jail. And that's no offense to nobody or anything. I'm just saying. So another maybe operational flaw of this one is infiltration of lower levels in the hierarchy can jeopardize the entire organization. So it's kind of like a house of cards effect. So I just said that about how, like I said, people want to rise from the bottom to the top, and they want to do it before they have done the work that you're supposed to put in this type of bureaucratic, corporate operation type of criminal behavior. So death, injury, incarcerations or eternal power struggles dramatically heighten the insecurity of these type of operations. So, just saying. So, and this is one of the ones I was talking about. This emphasizes more of a business type of thing process. So, hence what we were talking about before, the struggle, right? Or the debate that's going on. So, like corporations and the families that run America, et cetera, those type of things. They're using this type of model. So, just saying, I'll let you think about that. You can let me know what you think about that on Twitter. I will post some questions about this specific episode, and I'll tell you why closer to the end of it. So make sure that you're paying attention and that you will follow me on Twitter at Society Complex 1. Okay, so moving right along here. The next organizational model that we have for organized crime is youth and street gangs. I'm not going to say a lot about this one because we all know what they are. You live here. You live in the world, so you know pretty much what this one is. But a lot of youth street gangs are marked to increase. That they did a study back in 2002. So they estimated that between 2002 and 2010, it would increase by about 30%. Distinctive gang culture, it's not all organized groups, but depending on your activity, you may be deemed as a organized group if your group is of a certain sophistication, I guess, in the criminal underworld. Then you will get deemed as a organized group, only if you are that way. So when you start to develop recruiting strategies, social learning processes, and corrective systems, stuff like that, then that's when you start to get these kinds of things. So street gangs are usually made up of like a lot of youth, families, peer involvement to be in crimes, coercive actions of criminal authority figures. So the term street gang is commonly used. It might be interchangeable with youth gang, but obviously we see a lot of older guys, women, whatever, in what you used to call youth gangs, so now they're just called street gangs, pretty much. So these gangs usually come together on a united mutual interest. Okay, but they still do have identifiable leaderships and a internal organization. So they act collectively, or maybe as even individuals if they don't have necessarily a quote unquote team around them. It could just be one person at the top and, going on down. So that's where the individuals come in at. To achieve a specific purpose. So this is something they may include conducting illegal activity or control a particular territory, which we know can mean blocks, streets, even down to cities, facilities, or even a certain enterprise. So you might say, for instance, you may have one street gang, they may only want to sell crack cocaine. And then you may have another one that they may only want to do heroin. But then, if someone comes in and they say, you know what, we want to sell crack cocaine and heroin, then that might be a problem. If they're going off of they only want to do one certain enterprise. Right. So, and some reasons for that youth join gangs, they may include to feel accepted, attain status in their social or neighborhood. Also, may be used to increase their self-esteem. And it's a sense of unity that brings people together, even though it's for the wrong reasons, but it may become sort of like a family aspect, especially if they're lacking certain things at home. And that has nothing to do with race or anything like that. That's just how it goes. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm just talking about any certain race here, because there's street gangs all over. And there's street gangs that are of many different race and ethnicities and cultures. So don't think that it's just one. A lot of people have broken homes or they're lacking something at home, or even if their family life seems to be perfect, they may feel, that they have low self-esteem, or they still may feel the need to have more of a need to be accepted, among what society deems as normal. So street gangs can come from anywhere, like rich neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods. So please don't, like I said, underestimate where their street gangs at, because they are not all street gangs, and all organized crime is not in poor neighborhoods. So keep that in mind, okay? And you'll see that once we get to more talking about some cases, and once we actually get into, especially when we start talking about the RICO Act, TLC, criminal enterprises, and things of that nature, you'll actually see where these things are occurring at. Because we're going to go over cases, we're going to go over, like I said, we're going to go over the law, we're going to go over many, many things, okay? So moving right along with our youth/street gangs. So zones of transition, these are what they call deteriorating neighborhoods, right? Which with shifting populations is what they call it. Like I said, yes, they do have those areas. Like I said, it's not all those areas, but in such areas, you may find conflict between many groups fighting, or what we call turf wars. So they promote theft to promote solidarity, things like that. Okay, so in 1955, a working class teenagers joined gangs due to frustration of inability to achieve status and goals of the current middle class. So this, like I said, that is usually why people would join street gangs. But street gangs, like I said, there's no ethnic group that is more disposed to gang involvement than another. Rather, it's more of a thing of status of being marginalized or alienated, and like I said, are rejected, because many people feel that across the board, and that, like I said, has nothing to do with any sort of thing. Because poor doesn't have a race, and that's just being honest. Anybody can be poor, or anybody can feel rejected, or anybody can feel social exclusion. But basically what I'm saying is, these are the ideas behind street gangs. These are where street gangs are formed in these type of neighborhoods, with these type of people all mixed together and have these feelings. So they are usually identifiable in large part by colors, symbols, patches, flags, or maybe even tattoos. But when street gangs first started come about, participation in gang-related events during adolescent patterns of maltreatment of their own children, they kind of get together and, do something about that. But they're involved in many things: drug trafficking, prostitution. The list goes on and on. Theft, murder, and like I said, once you get into more sophisticated street gangs, then that's when you are start going to see the bribery. You're going to see the drug trafficking at a high level. Obstruction of justice, those kind of things come into that. Arson, you may even see extortion, kidnapping, murder. Those are the type of things you're going to see in the street gangs, right? So most of those are going to, some of them, they do go up to federal charges, but a lot of them are state charges under the RICO Act. Okay, So, and then, like I said, with a lot of street gangs also, there's there's thousands of different street gangs because they're so broken up by, like I said, states, cities, streets, blocks, stuff like that. So there's many of those. So, and it's more their business or their enterprise is usually based on supply and demand. So talk about, like I said, sex and drug trafficking, arms, which are guns and things like that. And they even kind of dip into protection rackets also, just like we were talking about the other ones. So sometimes they do those where they break out and they go do protection rackets where, they will say they can protect your store from a certain other gang, and all you have to do is pay them. So that is what they call protection rackets. And some of them even do political intimidation and drug trafficking activities, and they are employed by other people, or sometimes other gangs do work together. But that's just the way that goes. Okay, so the next one. Individual difference. Okay, entrepreneurial. The entrepreneurial model, it's either an individual criminal or a smaller group of organized criminals. So these is made where you see bank robberies, you know what I mean, stuff like that, or when people hijack trucks with guns or drugs and stuff like that. So those are highly sophisticated, small, or it could be one, but usually smaller groups of organized criminals. So they like to capitalize off of more fluid group association, right? So than our contemporary organized crime. So this model confirms to social learning theory or differentiational association in their clear association and interaction between criminals. And the knowledge is shared, and the values are enforced. However, it is argued that rational choices is not represented in this. I don't know though, because it's rational to me to get a group of people together with specific skills, and you only work together when you need to work together. So it's like you're associating with each other and you're kind of a group, but you're not actually a group. But if you do a crime together, then you become the group, or become a group of organized crime, right? So to me, I don't know, that seems kind of rational, but who am I? I'm just kidding. So, in this one, they really have a choice to commit a certain act or associate with other crime groups. So like I said, they are just people, it's like freelance type of deal. It's like a freelance. So this is more of a entrepreneurial, like I said, thing. So they're making more of a entrepreneurial decisions as to how they operate and what kind of crimes that they do, right? So this criminal organization, in the same way as some of the other ones, they assess pleasure and pain, which weighs such factors as legal, social, and economic risks to determine potential profit and loss from certain criminal activities. So like I said, they're only thinking about money, basically, and it's entrepreneurial and very individualized group of things. So it's like, this get together, let's make this money, and then let's disperse. And then they can kind of move around quite a bit. So it usually works off of recruitment or your reputation, efficiency, and things like that. So that is where you see entrepreneurial models come forth. So the next one we have right here is multi-model approach. So this is culture and ethnicity. And it provides an environment where trust and communication between criminals can be efficient and secure. So this is mainly ultimately led to a competitive advantage for some groups. However, inaccurately, to adopt this in only determined of classification in organized crime. So this is where you're going to see these categorizations include the Sicilian Mafia, ethnic Chinese criminal groups, Japanese Yakuza, Colombian drug trafficking groups, Nigerian organized crime, Korean criminal groups, and Jamaican they are called posses. From this perspective, organized crime is not a modern phenomenon from this one. It constructs back to 17th and 18th century crime gangs to fulfill all the present day criteria of a criminal organization, as that is opposed to the alien conspiracy theory. Okay, and if you believe in aliens, that's your thing. So beyond that, then that's the opposite of this. Okay, so some people see, as like I said, the alien conspiracy theory, they see those as gangs also, if that's your thing. So they roamed around rural borderlands of Central Europe, embarking on some illegal activities associated with today's criminal organization. And these are such things as, like, say, money laundering, right? So in the French Revolution, it created strong national states. Criminal gangs moved to other poorly controlled regions, say, like southern Italy, where their seeds were sown for the Sicilian Mafia. And Sicilian Mafia is what they call the linchpin of organized crime in the New World. All right. So the next model that we have is computational approach. So this is a conceptual framework used to model organized crime, emphasis on the role of actors and or activities. This approach is built on the foundations of data science and AI, which is artificial intelligence. For those you doesn't know what AI means, they are focusing on deriving new insights into organized crime from big data. So this is something like novel machine learning models that have been applied to study and detect in urban crime and online prostitution networks. So this is things that you're doing online, like let's say, example, Backpage. Backpage is would go into this. So that is online prostitution networks where they go online. They use Twitter. They use Backpage. They use what's that other thing? Craigslist. They start to use those type of things. So they've gone digital. Organized crime has gone digital, especially in the online sex trade. Because like even right now, like what is that thing? OnlyFans. Even though that's legal-ish. And you get paid for doing that on there. So a lot of people have a problem with OnlyFans, even though some sex workers, they say it's safer for them, and it's better. And now we obviously have celebrities and everybody and their mama on OnlyFans, but some people agree, some people do not. But that is a perfect example of computational approach with the model of organized crime. Okay, so moving right along here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about 4 more national types, right? So organized crime types, I'm sorry. National is the model type. So the environment is historical and cultural basis. So the group usually is families, hierarchies. The processes, they have to rely on secrecy, bonds, links to insurgents. The impact, local corruption, influence. So they're talking about fraud, voter fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, bribes, stuff like that, and fearful communities. Transnational, which is between countries and things like that. The environment is usually political and economically unstable. That's usually the environment that they run in. The group, vertical integration processes. They use a legitimate covers for their things. Say they do sell boats to international people in other countries, or say they use shipping. They ship anything, with the crates on boats or anything like that. Those are usually legitimate covers for those type of business. So the impacts of those stable supply of illicit goods, which means they are pretty much doing this with ease because there's such a stable supply of it going around, because they're using their legitimate businesses to cover this. And usually these things concern, with the impacts, they usually are at a high level of corruption. Okay, so transnational and transactional environment, any really groups, they're usually smaller, more flexible. The processes are usually more risk-taking, violent. They usually do crimes of opportunity, right? So the impact of these are unstable supply of the range of illicit goods, and it exploits young local offenders. So of that, you would be talking about local gangs getting together, or organized, or the smaller groups of organized crime. So that's one we were talking about, the entrepreneurial model of crime. So the next one is entrepreneurial and transactional. The environment that they usually operate in is usually developed high technology regions, right? So usually they're groups. The group of these are individuals, or they may work in pairs. The process are usually operating through legitimate enterprises, and the impact of those are provision of illicit services such as money laundering, fraud, and criminal networks. Okay, thank you guys so much for tuning in here today on Society Complex. Please stay tuned on our next episode. We're going to continue with the series of organized crime for True Crime Chronicles. So the next thing we're going to talk about on our next episode is going to be typical activities of organized crimes. Okay, so you got violent assault, we're going to talk about terrorism, we're going to talk about coercion, extortion, protection racket, we're going to talk about arms trafficking, we're going to talk about arson, we're going to do financial crimes, counterfeiting, money laundering, tax evasion. All these things, like I said, you may not even realize it, but some of these things do fall under this organized crime thing, okay? Because they do many, many different things. So like I said, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about cyber crimes, down to copyright infringements, computer violence. We're just going to talk about everything, okay? So make sure you stay tuned on our next episode here on Society Complex, on our segment for True Crime Chronicles.